I'm really excited because this is a video I've wanted to make for a while, examining the scene that I'm going to examine today. But in doing the research for it, I realized that I really needed to expand it. Like, I needed to examine other scenes in order to have a framework from which to shine any kind of light on what's happening in this scene and what the ramifications for what happens in it are for our ideas about how things work in Frank Herbert's Dune saga. Like, what are the rules that define this universe, if there are any, and what, how powerful are certain characters and what kind of agency they have. So, in the first three Dune novels, I've identified three scenes that are the most fascinating, tantalizing, and puzzling, purely from the perspective of the reader or the outsider. What or who, if anything or anyone, animates the action in these scenes? Rather than in chronological order, I think it is more helpful to try to dig our way out, start in the middle with the most perplexing, and hope that our analysis illuminates the others as we get closer to the surface. The scene with which I'll begin is in Book 3. Farad'n, the grandson of the Padisha Emperor Shaddam IV of House Corrino, has undertaken the beginning of the Prada Bindu training under the tutelage of the Bene Gesserit, once known as Lady Jessica. Jessica instructs the young Corrino man to stare at his hands until he can will them to age and de-age before his eyes. "My mind controls my reality," he exclaims, upon achieving this feat. There are, of course, many ways to read this scene. Perhaps the prevalent reading is that, though he thinks he has achieved a feat of independence, it is instead a ruse of mind control by Jessica, who has, by all accounts, returned entirely to the fold of the sisterhood, and seeks to control this potential Kwisatz Haderach in order to make up for the loss of control and death caused by her son Paul. "My mind melted. I was tired. My mind gave up its fighting," says Farad'n. He then clarifies that he was not fighting or submitting to Jessica, but to himself. Jessica here is much more devious than her younger self was. Having seen one child cause a galactic war and another possessed by the spirit of her evil father, she can ill afford to loose another powerful, inbred royal heir upon the Duneverse, one who is not completely under the control of the sisterhood. Let's say that the next way we can read the scene is that it is not a trick of his mind perpetuated on him by Jessica, but that it is all actually happening. In this reading, which we'll call the generous, reality-bending, Jessica-trusting reading, to distinguish it from the previous cynical Jessica reading, in it we must further ask, do Farad'n's hands change, or does Farad'n move through time such that he sees the future in the same way he remembers his infancy? The time travel, though it is likely more of a spiritual time travel, a la the movie X-Men Days of Future Past, for instance, is more likely. We see this slipping of the time stream to cause almost magical events somewhat regularly in the Dune saga. Paul flying the ornithopter while blind in Book 2, for instance. And that scene connects to, but is not one of the other two scenes which I'll examine in the subsequent videos. Now, if it's the time stream slipping thing, instead of a present-day conscious morphing of his own body into an aged or de-aged state, is Farad'n of the future actually time traveling back in order to prevent his own death? Later the second, right after consuming the unchanged spice essence, and while still in a trance of sorts on Jakutu in Book 3, says, Your reality differs from all others, thus you know you're alive. And then he says, beware paths which narrow future possibilities. Such paths divert you from infinity into lethal traps. Has the future Farad'n, a dead one, awoken to the Farad'n who is patiently staring at the hands of his own outstretched arms, and realized, patience being such an unusual trait in a young person of means, of noble blood, realized that he's seeing through the eyes of an alive Farad'n whose reality differs from all others, all the other dead Farad'ns in the futures that he's trying to avoid. Is Farad'n learning how to embrace infinity and avoid lethal traps? If we go this far with this reading, it almost doesn't matter whether it's a slipstream thing or a lightning fast, instantaneous morphing thing. Farad'n is equally powerful if it's him who's doing it. But I think the religious focus of the Dune saga and the questions raised by both the cynical Jessica and generous Jessica readings of this scene mean that we must consider a third possibility, a third entity to which we can assign the agency for these events. One whom we won't be able to name necessarily, but who is not Jessica or Farad'n or Hark al-Ada, as Farad'n of the future is eventually known. Perhaps there are gods, demons, or eternal spirits in the Duneverse who seek an immortal body on the corporeal plane, but who will take a human body if no immortal body is available, and through which they can exert power or influence events. Perhaps one of these deities, or demiurges, or spirits in Farad'n's delirium of patience exercise meditation, tricked him into making his hand change to give him the illusion of control so that it could influence his fate. For, as Leto II says in God Emperor of Dune, it is human to have your soul brought to a crisis you did not anticipate. The question is, who's doing the bringing? In part 2, I'll examine how this idea of agency from non-human spirits relates to Aaliyah and to the Baron Harkonnen. Thanks for watching.